Lankvatara Sutra, Part 6. Yeah, I'm getting nervous. I haven't done this in a while. Mahatma Bodhisattva once again asked the Buddha, Bhagavan, in how many ways do the various forms of consciousness arise, persist, and cease? The Buddha told Mahamati, there are two ways in which the various forms of consciousness arise, persist, and cease, both of which are beyond the understanding of logicians. The two ways in which the forms of consciousness arise are as a continuity or as a characteristic. The two ways in which they persist are as a continuity or as a characteristic. And the two ways in which they cease are as a continuity or as a characteristic. And the different forms of consciousness, Mahamati, have three aspects: an unfolding aspect, a karmic aspect, and an intrinsic aspect. Mahamati, what we generally speak of as the eight forms of consciousness can be summarized under three headings: true consciousness, perceiving consciousness, and object projecting consciousness. Mahamati, our perceiving consciousness functions like a clear mirror in which shapes and images appear. Mahamati, although perceiving consciousness and objective perceiving, or sorry, object projecting consciousness are the cause of whether they are separate from each other or not. Perceiving consciousness, Mahamati, is the result of imperceptible habit energy and imperceptible transformations, while object projecting consciousness is the result of grasping different phenomenon and the habit energy of beginningless projections. Mahamati, when all the false projections obscuring our true consciousness cease, all forms of sensory consciousness cease. This, Mahamati, is what is meant by the cessation of characteristics. Mahamati, as for the cessation of continuity, when the cause of the continuity ceases, continuity itself ceases. It ceases when what it depends upon and what supports it cease. And Mahamati, why is this so? It is because it is dependent. What it depends on is the habit energy of the beginningless projections. And what supports it are the projections of the objects of consciousness perceived by one's own mind. Mahamati, take for example a lump of clay and particles of dust. They are neither separate nor are they not separate. The same is true of gold and ornaments. Mahamati, if a lump of clay and the particles of dust were separate, the latter could not comprise the former, but they do, since they are not separate. Yet, if they were not separate, the lump of clay would not be distinguished from the particles of dust. Thus, Mahamati, if the intrinsic aspect of our repository consciousness and the unfolding aspect of consciousness were separate, the repository consciousness could not be its cause. But if they were not separate, the cessation of the unfolding aspect of consciousness would also mean that the cessation would also mean the cessation of the repository consciousness. And yet, its intrinsic aspect does not cease. Thus, Mahamati, what ceases is not the intrinsic aspect of consciousness, only its karmic aspect. For if the intrinsic aspect of consciousness ceased, repository consciousness would cease. And if repository consciousness ceased, Mahamati, that would be no different from the nihilistic views proposed by followers of other paths. Mahamati, the followers of other paths claim that when the grasping of an eternal or an external world ceases, the continuity of consciousness also ceases. But if the continuity of consciousness ceased, that continuity which had no beginning would end. Mahamati, followers of all other paths say that the rising of continuity is not caused by the conjunction of visual consciousness with form and light, but is caused by something else. And that cause, Mahamati, they say, is an ineffable force or primal being or supreme lord or minute particle or time. And furthermore, Mahamati, there are 7 kinds of self-existence. The self-existence of origination, the self-existence of existence, the self-existence of characteristics, the self-existence of material elements, the self-existence of causes, the self-existence of conditions, and the self-existence of completion. Furthermore, Mahamati, there are 7 kinds of higher truths. Those regarding the realm of the mind, the realm of wisdom, the realm of knowledge, the realm of views, the realm beyond dualistic views, the realm beyond the Bodhisattva stages, and the realm of a Tathagata's personal attainment, which, Mahamati, is the mind of the self-existent, higher truths of all Tathagatas, arhats, and fully enlightened ones of the past, the present, and the future. It is by means of this mind all the self-existent higher truths that the mundane, metaphysical, and transcendent teachings of Tathagatas are formed, while it is by means of their wisdom eye that their individual and shared characteristics are established. However, what are thereby established are not the same as the doctrines and erroneous views of other schools. And what are the same, Mahamati, as the doctrines and erroneous views of other schools? This refers to projections and views of one's own realm without realizing their perceptions of one's own mind. Due to their obliviousness, Mahamati, such foolish people maintain dualistic views and doctrines of existence and non-existence as their self-existent higher truth. Mahamati, the cessation of suffering that comes from giving rise to projections of the 3 realms, and the cessation of ignorance, desire, and karma that result from seeing the perceptions of one's own mind are the realms of illusion. That is what I now teach. Mahamati, to account for how something that does not exist comes to existence due to the presence of causation, and how it persists in time in connection with the skandhas, the dhatus, and the anyatas, some monks and priests say, once it arises, it ceases. Mahamati, whether it is in regard to a continuity, a function, a birth, an existence, nirvana, a path, karma, attainment, or truth, they argue that it is destroyed and ceases to exist. And why is this so? Because it cannot be found in the present, nor can its beginning be discerned. Mahamati, it is just as a shattered jug no longer functions as a jug, or a burnt seed no longer functions as a seed. Likewise, Mahamati, if the skandhas, the dhatus, and the anyatas exist, then cease to exist in the present or in the future. This is due to the projection or view of one's own mind, not to a cause. This is why they don't continue to arise. Mahamati, if someone says that the existence of consciousness, conscious form, I'm sorry, if the existence of consciousness from its non-existence is due to the threefold conjunction of conditions, then hair would grow on a tortoise, or cooking oil could be produced from sand. And such a thesis falls apart, because it is contrary to established truth. and statements about the existence, then non-existence of something contain this defect. They render whatever we might do as empty and meaningless. Mahamati, when followers of other paths claim something arises because of the threefold conjunction of conditions, they are referring to the operation of cause and effect and to whether their individual characteristics exist, then do not exist in the past, the present, or the future. But such claims are essentially the result of logic or speculation or views based on one's habit energy from the past. Thus, Mahamati, despite being affected by mistaken conceptions and misled by distorted beliefs, and despite their lack of knowledge, fools claim to be wise. But there are other monks and priests, Mahamahi, who see things as devoid of self-existence, as clouds in the sky, or wheels of fire, or cities of Gandharvas, and as not arising, as illusions, or mirages, or dreams, or moonlight on the water, and regardless of whether they appear to be inside or outside the mind, as projections from beginning as past, and are not as not existing apart from one's own mind. And when the causes of such projections cease, and the repository consciousness becomes free from projections of a body, its possessions, and the world around it, and from what it speaks and what is spoken, and from what it sees and what is seen, they accordingly see what grasps and what is grasped as no longer interacting in the realm of consciousness, whatever the mind gives rise to as existing in a projection-free realm devoid of origination, duration, and cessation. Namaste. Such bodhisattvas soon realize the identity of samsara and nirvana. With effortless compassion and skillful means, Mahamati, they view the realms of all beings as illusions and not subject to causation, transcending internal, and external realms, and seeking nothing outside the mind. They accordingly proceed from one stage to the next in samadhis that are free from appearances. And upon examining the three realms and finding them illusionary, they attain the samadhi of the illusionary. And once the perceptions of their own minds are free of projections, they are able to dwell in the perfection of wisdom and to let go of their lives and their practice and enter into the diamond samadhi that accompanies the Tathagata's body and that accompanies the transformation of suchness. Thus endowed with higher powers and masteries, as well as compassion and skillful means, they enter the sanctuary of other paths in every Buddha land, and transcending the mind, the will, and conceptual consciousness, these bodhisattvas gradually transform their bodies into the body of a Tathagata. Moreover, Mahamati, those who seek the body that accompanies a Tathagata should avoid the fabricated projections of origination, duration, or cessation regarding the skandhas, the dhatus, the ajnatas, consciousness, causation, or forms of practice. Who sees that the habit energy of projections of the beginningless past is the cause of the three realms, and who understands that the Tathagata stage is free from projections, or anything that arises, attains the personal realization of Buddha knowledge and effortless mastery over their own minds. And like gems, capable of reflecting every color, they enter the subtlest thoughts of other beings, and in their apparition bodies teach them nothing but mind, while establishing them in the stages of sequence of stages. Therefore, Mahamati, you should devote yourself to the cultivation of personal attainment. At that time, Mahamati Bodhisattva said, "May the Bhagavan teach us about the characteristics of the mind, will, and conceptual consciousness, the five dharmas, the modes of reality cultivated by Buddhas and Bodhisattvas differ from the external realms perceived by our mind. And may the Tathagata reveal the teachings marked by suchness that comprise the heart of the words of every Buddha, and may explain for the great Bodhisattvas gathered here on Mount Maya, the island kingdom of Lanka, the ocean and waves of repository consciousness, and the realm of the Dharma body praised by all Tathagatas." The Bhagavan then told Mahamati, "There are four causes that result in the functioning of visual consciousness." And what are the four? They are lack of awareness that what is grasped is a projection of one's mind, attachment to the habit energy of erroneous fabrications of the beginningless past by existence of consciousness, and the desire to seek a multiplicity of forms. Mahamati. These are the four cases that give rise to the waves of consciousness in the overrolling sea of repository consciousness. Mahamati, as well as its visual form, consciousness arises together with the minutest sensory objects and sensory material of various sense organs. And with it arise external realms, as like with so many images in a clear mirror, or like the ocean when the strong wind blows. And as the wind of externality stirs the sea of the mind, its waves of consciousness never cease. Whether there is any difference or not among the characteristics of causes and effects is due to a deep attachment to what arises from karma. Because people cannot understand the nature of such things as form, the five kinds of sensory consciousness function, and due to the differentiation of appearances, Mahamati, you should know that these five kinds of sensory consciousness serve as the cause of conceptual consciousness. But as they function, they do not think that they are the cause of changes in appearances, which change as a result of attachment to the projections that are perceptions of one's own mind. And as every appearance changes and disappears, the different realms that are distinguished themselves change. Those practitioners who enter dhyana or samadhi, but who remain unaware of the changes of subtler forms of habit energy, think they enter dhyana and samadhi only after consciousness ceases. But in fact, their consciousness does not cease when they enter samadhi. It does not cease, because the seeds of habit energy are not destroyed. It ceases when it no longer grasps changes among objective realms. Mahamati, except for Tathagatas, and those well along the Bodhisattva path, the full extent of the subtlety of the repository consciousness remains completely beyond the ken of the Sharyakas, the Prajakya Buddhas, and practitioners of other paths, despite their powers of meditation and wisdom. Likewise, how to distinguish the characteristics of the remaining stages, or the meaning of words about wisdom and skillful means, or how to bring to maturity the limitless good roots planted by Buddhas, or how to get free from the projections and fabrications that are perceptions of their own minds. Mahamati, those who dwell among mountains and forests, regardless of whether they cultivate lesser, normal, or greater practices, if they were to see how projections flow from their own minds, they will never have their foreheads anointed, they will ever have their foreheads anointed by Buddhas from countless lands. And as they attain mastery, psychic faculties, higher powers, and samadhis, they will be surrounded by bodhisattvas and spiritual friends. And because of this, they will transcend the sea of birth and death, karma, desire, and self-existence of the mind, the will, and conceptual consciousness that are perceptions of their own minds. This is why Mahamati practitioners should draw near to Buddhists and spiritual friends. The Bhagavan then repeated the meaning of this in verse. Just like the boundless, I'm sorry, I can't do this. Just like waves in the boundless sea, blown by the powerful wind, breakers on the black expanse, they never for a moment cease. And the ocean of Idaya, stirred by the wind of externality, wave after wave of consciousness, breaks and swells again. Blue and red and ivory color, milk and sugar and coconut shells, fragrances and fruit and flowers, the sun, moon and light. Like the ocean and its waves, neither separate nor not separate. 7 forms of consciousness raised together with the mind, like the ever-changing sea, gives rise to different waves. Repository consciousness gives rise to different forms. Mind, will, and consciousness, these refer to different forms, but forms devoid of differences, no clear, nothing seen. As the ocean and its waves cannot be divided, the moon and the forms of consciousness cannot be separated. The mind is what gathers karma. The will considers what is gathered. The forms of consciousness are conscious of the 5 apparent worlds. Mahamahi Bodhisattva asked in verse, when colors such as blue or red appear in someone's consciousness, and every thought is like a wave, what does this mean? The Bhagavan then replied in verse, blue and red and other colors cannot be found in any wave. We say the mind gathers karma to awaken foolish beings, but karma isn't real, and thus make their minds let go. What grasped and what is grasped? I liken it to waves. Their body, possessions, and the world. This is what they are conscious of. This is how their karma appears, just like surging waves. The Mahamati asked in verse, the ocean and its waves exist, we can see them dance. Why, then, are we not aware of Ayaya, consciousness, and karma? The Bhagavan then answered in verse, for fools bereft of wisdom, Alaya is likened to an ocean, and karma is to its waves. Those simply they understand. And then Mahamari said in verse, I wasn't expecting this. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Sunlight shines the same on beings of all classes, and synthetic is like the world to teach the truth to asses. I had to do that. He said fools, but what? Versed in every kind of teaching, why don't they teach the truth? To which the Buddha replied in verse, if they taught the truth, in beings' mind there would be no truth. It's like the ocean and its waves, a dream or image in a mirror. Both appear together as to the mind and objective realms. But objective realms are never perfect, and karma keeps arising. And while consciousness is conscious, likewise the will just wills. The fivefold appearances, except in meditation, the master artist works, and the master students drawing forms and spreading colors. To teach like this, the colors don't contain a pattern, nor do the brush or pristine service. To please the host of beings, they render figures with their art, but teachings are unfaithful, for truth isn't in the words. I make distinctions for beginners, for practitioners I teach the truth they realize themselves, free from knowledge and unknown. This I teach to bodhisattvas, a broader view to fools, all manner of illusions, but nothing I reveal is real. Thus my teachings are diverse, tailored to the situation, and if the teaching doesn't fit, it doesn't get taught. Because each patient differs, good physicians just their cures, Buddhists touch these beings according to their capacities. Around with the projections, unknown to Skyrajkas, this is what the compassionate teach, the realm of ever realization. I'm going to stop it here because that was the end of the verse. So, end of part 6.